Picture this scene. November 1910. A private railway car departs Hoboken, New Jersey under cover of darkness. Inside 7 men. No last names allowed. No servants who might talk. Just first names only. These 7 men represent approximately 1/4 of the entire world's wealth. They're traveling to a private island off the coast of Georgia. The stated purpose is a duck hunting trip. The real purpose will change the course of American history forever. What you're about to discover isn't theory. It's documented fact, admitted by the participants themselves decades later, written in their memoirs, confirmed by historical records. This is the story of how America's banking system was designed in total secrecy by men who had everything to gain from controlling the nation's money supply. The meeting on Jekyll Island created the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System, a private banking cartel masquerading as a government institution, a system designed to transfer wealth from the many to the few, a mechanism of perpetual debt that would enslave generations of Americans not yet born. The official story claims the Federal Reserve was created to stabilize the economy and prevent banking panics. That's what they taught you in school. That's what the textbooks say. But the documents reveal something entirely different. This is the anatomy of a conspiracy, not a theory, but a documented plot involving the most powerful banking families in the world. Families whose names you know. Names like Rockefeller. Names like Morgan. Names connected to European dynasties that had financed kings and wars for centuries. And at the center of it all sits one man, Senator Nelson Aldrich, the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller, Jr., a man whose personal finances were so entangled with J.P. Morgan that he essentially functioned as Morgan's political operative in Washington. The duck hunting trip was a lie. There were no ducks. There was only conspiracy. And by the time these 7 men left Jekyll Island, they had created a system that would fundamentally alter the relationship between American citizens and their government. Let's follow the money. Let's decode the symbols. Let's expose the network. Because understanding what happened on Jekyll Island is understanding who really controls America. The year is 1837. A young man named August Belmont arrives in New York City. He comes as the financial agent of the Rothschild banking dynasty. His job is to funnel vast amounts of European capital into American investments without anyone knowing whose money it really is. The Rothschild name carries weight in Europe. Too much weight. Anti-Rothschild sentiment runs high on both sides of the Atlantic. People are becoming aware that a single family holds dangerous influence over nations and governments. So the Rothschilds need American agents, men who appear totally American, men whose ties to European banking dynasties remain hidden in shadow, men who can operate with plausible deniability. August Belmont serves this purpose for decades. He builds railroads. He finances infrastructure. He loans money to the federal government during the Civil War. And all the while, he's spending Rothschild money, directing Rothschild interests, serving Rothschild objectives. But by the late 1800s, Belmont's usefulness has expired. His Rothschild connections have become too well known. The family needs a new agent in America, someone more prestigious, someone whose American pedigree appears beyond question. Enter the House of Morgan. Junius Spencer Morgan and his son John Pierpont Morgan. Based in London, the Morgan firm cultivates a close social relationship with the Rothschilds. They become friendly competitors in appearance, but historical records suggest something more. In 1857, the Morgan banking firm faces financial ruin. The Bank of England steps in to save them. The Rothschilds hold enormous influence over the Bank of England. This is documented. After this rescue, something shifts in the Morgan operation. Evidence suggests J.P. Morgan begins functioning as a Rothschild financial agent in America. He goes to great lengths to appear purely American. He waves the flag. He builds monuments. He collects American art. But his actions consistently align with European banking interests. The Morgan empire grows vast. He gains control of railroads that span the continent. He consolidates steel production. He dominates shipping lanes. And at every turn, he's backed by seemingly endless capital from sources that remain deliberately obscured. Then there's John D. Rockefeller. The official story presents him as the quintessential self-made American industrialist, a man who built an oil empire through hard work and ruthless business practices. But dig deeper, and you find something more interesting. Rockefeller's first fortune came from selling narcotics. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's historical fact. Before narcotics were illegal, he sold them as medicine. He accumulated initial capital through what would today be called drug dealing. He branched into oil. Standard Oil became the most powerful corporation in America. But here's what the textbooks don't tell you. It was Rothschild capital that made Rockefeller truly powerful. It was European banking money that financed his expansion, his monopoly, his dominance. The Rockefellers weren't purely American either. Historical research indicates Marrano Jewish heritage, hidden for generations, obscured in official records. This matters because it reveals connection to the same European banking networks that produced the Rothschilds themselves. By 1900, both Morgan and Rockefeller stood at the pinnacle of American finance, competitors in public. But behind closed doors, they began coordinating, minimizing competition through joint ventures, creating interlocking directorates, building towards something bigger. They needed something else, though. They needed a mechanism to control not just their own wealth, but the entire nation's money supply. They needed a central bank. And that's where Jekyll Island enters the story. The United States had rejected central banking twice before. The first Bank of the United States expired in 1811. The second bank died in 1836, when Andrew Jackson declared war on it. Jackson's last words were reportedly, "I killed the bank." He understood what was at stake. For nearly 80 years, America operated without a central bank. And the banking elite hated this. They wanted control. They wanted the power to create money from nothing. They wanted the ability to loan the government its own currency at interest. But Americans remained suspicious. The memory of Jackson's bank war still resonated. Any legislation to create a new central bank would face fierce opposition. The plan would need to be disguised. It would need to appear as banking reform rather than banking consolidation. Senator Nelson Aldrich became the key political operative. Aldrich chaired the National Monetary Commission, supposedly tasked with studying banking reform. But Aldrich was no neutral party. His daughter Abby married John D. Rockefeller Jr. in 1901. This family connection gave Rockefeller direct access to the most powerful committee in the Senate. Through Aldrich, the banking elite could shape legislation. They could write laws that would benefit themselves. They could create the central bank they'd coveted for decades. Aldrich took a 2-year trip to Europe, ostensibly to study European banking systems. He met with the Rothschilds. He consulted with the Bank of England. He studied the German Reichsbank. And he came back with ideas. Ideas that would remake American finance in Europe's image. But there was a problem. Any proposal coming directly from Aldrich would be seen as tainted. He was too obviously connected to the banking interests. The public would never accept legislation with his fingerprints all over it. The plan needed plausible deniability. It needed to appear as if independent experts had developed it. It needed the veneer of academic respectability. It needed to be sold to the American people as protection against the banks, not a gift to them. So Aldrich hatched a plan. A secret meeting. No publicity. No records. Just the most powerful bankers in America gathering in total secrecy to design the system that would govern all banking. The location chosen was Jekyll Island, Georgia. The Jekyll Island Club was the most exclusive resort in America. The club's members included Morgans, Rockefellers, Astors, Vanderbilts, Pulitzers, and Goulds. These families owned 1/6 of the entire world's wealth. The club occupied the entire island. It was perfect for a secret meeting. No outsiders allowed. No journalists. No curious citizens. Just private beach, private forest, and absolute privacy. Frank Vanderlip, president of National City Bank, later wrote about the meeting in his autobiography. He described it as feeling like a conspirator in a novel. He said they were as furtive as any group of conspirators ever were. The 7 men who attended that November meeting represented the most concentrated financial power ever assembled in one place in human history. Let's identify them one by one, because understanding who attended reveals everything about what they created. Nelson Aldrich was there, of course, chairman of the National Monetary Commission, senator from Rhode Island, father-in-law to the Rockefellers. His personal investments were so intertwined with J.P. Morgan that he essentially functioned as Morgan's Senate agent. Henry P. Davison attended representing J.P. Morgan and Company. Davison was Morgan's senior partner. He spoke with Morgan's authority. Every decision Davison made was Morgan's decision. And Morgan, as we've established, operated as the Rothschilds' American representative. Frank Vanderlip came from National City Bank, the largest bank in America. National City was the Rockefellers' bank. Vanderlip represented Rockefeller interests at the table. Later, he would admit the meeting's conspiratorial nature in his memoirs. Paul Warburg was perhaps the most interesting attendee. born in Germany to the Warburg banking family. The Warburgs were part of the same network as the Rothschilds. Paul had emigrated to America and married into the Kuhn, Loeb and Company banking family through his marriage to Nina Loeb. Kuhn, Loeb and Company was run by Jacob Schiff, who had direct Rothschild connections. Warburg brought European central banking expertise. He'd studied the German system intimately. He understood how central banks functioned as mechanisms of control. Benjamin Strong attended as well. Strong represented J.P. Morgan's interests and would later become the first head of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, the most powerful position in the entire Federal Reserve System. Charles D. Norton was there as president of Morgan's First National Bank of New York. Another Morgan man, another representative of the House of Morgan at the table. Finally, there was Abraham Piatt Andrew, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, the only government official present. Andrew provided political cover and government perspective on what legislation might pass Congress. 7 men. But really, they represented only 3 interests: Morgan, Rockefeller, and the European banking dynasties connected through Warburg. The appearance of diversity masked the reality of consolidated power. The cover story was ridiculous. Senator Aldrich was supposedly going duck hunting with some banker friends in November, off the coast of Georgia. Never mind that Aldrich had never shown interest in duck hunting before. They left from Hoboken, New Jersey in a private railway car. Shades drawn. Instructions given to use only first names. The secrecy was deliberate and absolute. They knew what they were doing was explosive. The private railway car took them south through the night. They arrived at Brunswick, Georgia, where a private boat transported them to Jekyll Island. The club had been closed for the season. All staff dismissed except for a handful of servants who'd signed secrecy agreements. For 9 days, these 7 men worked. They met in the clubhouse, a sprawling Victorian structure overlooking the Atlantic. The building still stands today, preserved as a museum. You can visit the rooms where they plotted. The days fell into a pattern. Morning meetings where they debated structure. Afternoon sessions where Warburg explained European central banking systems. Evening discussions where they refined their plan. All meals taken together. All conversations focused on a single goal. That goal was simple: create a central banking system that appeared to be government-controlled, but was actually privately owned. Make it look like banking reform while actually consolidating banking power. Sell it to the public as protection against bank panics while actually creating a mechanism for perpetual profit. They called it the Federal Reserve System. The name was marketing genius. Federal sounds governmental. Reserve sounds safe and prudent. System sounds organized and rational. But examine the reality behind each word, and you find deception. Federal implies government control, but the Federal Reserve is private. It's owned by member banks. It's run by bankers. It's accountable to no one. Presidents can suggest but cannot command. Congress can question but cannot audit. The Fed operates beyond democratic control. Reserve implies that something is being held in reserve. But the Fed operates on fractional reserve principles. It holds only a fraction of the money it claims to have. It creates money from nothing through the mandrake mechanism. There is no reserve. System sounds organized, but the Fed is designed to be confusing, deliberately complex, intentionally opaque. The structure obscures accountability. The mechanisms baffle understanding. This isn't accidental. It's designed to prevent scrutiny. Paul Warburg did most of the technical work. He drafted the actual plan. He understood how European central banks operated, and he imported those principles to America. But he made modifications, adjustments that would make the plan more palatable to suspicious Americans. The key innovation was creating regional Federal Reserve banks, 12 of them spread across the country. This gave the appearance of decentralization. It suggested that no single entity controlled the money supply. But this was illusion. The New York Federal Reserve Bank would hold the real power. It would conduct open market operations. It would hold the gold. It would interact with European central banks. And the New York Fed would be controlled by the very banks that sent representatives to Jekyll Island. They also created the Board of Governors in Washington, appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate. This provided political cover. It allowed them to claim government oversight. But the board's power was limited. The real authority rested with the regional banks, especially New York. The plan included another brilliant deception. The Federal Reserve would have the power to create money, but it would only create money when the government went into debt. Every dollar created would be a dollar loaned at interest to the federal government. Think about that mechanism. The government needs money. It issues a bond. The Federal Reserve buys that bond with money created from nothing. The government now owes the Fed the principal plus interest. Where does the money to pay the interest come from? More bonds, more debt, a perpetual cycle. This is modern financial alchemy, turning debt into money, creating something from nothing, charging interest on the nothing, ensuring that the debt can never be fully repaid, because the money to pay the interest doesn't exist until more debt is created. The men on Jekyll Island understood they were creating something revolutionary, a self-perpetuating system of debt, a mechanism that would transfer wealth from the productive economy to the banking system, a machine that could never be turned off. They worked for 9 days straight. By the time they left Jekyll Island in late November 1910, the blueprint was complete. They had their plan. Now came the harder part, selling it to Congress and the American people. The group understood they couldn't just present the plan as written on Jekyll Island. It would be rejected immediately. Americans remembered Andrew Jackson's war against the Second Bank. They distrusted centralized banking power. The plan needed camouflage. Senator Aldrich introduced the legislation in 1911 as the Aldrich Plan. It died instantly. The opposition was fierce. Progressive Republicans and Democrats united against it. They recognized it for what it was, a banker's bill designed to benefit banks. The problem was Aldrich himself. Everyone knew his Rockefeller connections. Everyone understood his Morgan ties. His name on the legislation poisoned it. The Jekyll Island conspirators realized they needed a different approach. They needed Democrats to introduce the plan. They needed it to appear as if it came from banking reform advocates rather than banking insiders. They needed to rebrand their creation as populist legislation protecting the common man from Wall Street. This is where the deception becomes truly masterful. Watch how they executed it. The 1912 presidential election became the vehicle. 3 candidates ran. William Howard Taft for Republicans, Woodrow Wilson for Democrats, Theodore Roosevelt for the Progressive Bull Moose Party. All 3 candidates supported creation of a central bank. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination. The banking elite hedged all bets. No matter who won, they would get their central bank. The election's outcome was irrelevant to their objectives. Woodrow Wilson won. But Wilson didn't really run his own administration. Behind him stood Colonel Edward Mandell House. House was Wilson's most trusted advisor, his handler, his connection to the banking elite. House had written a novel years earlier called Philip Drew Administrator. In it, he described a conspiracy to establish a socialist government in America through control of the banking system. He wasn't warning about conspiracy. He was describing his own plan. House was close to the Rockefeller family. He maintained connections to Morgan interests. He understood the Jekyll Island plan intimately, and he made sure Wilson understood what was expected of him. Wilson appointed Carter Glass as chairman of the House Banking Committee. Glass was supposedly a banking reform advocate, a populist, a man of the people. But Glass worked closely with Paul Warburg to revise the Jekyll Island plan into something Congress might accept. They renamed it. Instead of the Aldrich Plan, it became the Federal Reserve Act. Same content, different label. They emphasized government oversight. They highlighted the Board of Governors. They obscured the private ownership structure. The legislation was introduced in December 1913. Timing matters here. Congress was exhausted. The session was ending. Many members had already left Washington for Christmas. The remaining members wanted to go home. The Federal Reserve Act passed the House on December 22nd. It passed the Senate on December 23rd. President Wilson signed it into law on December 23rd, 1913, right before Christmas, when nobody was paying attention. This timing wasn't accidental. The conspirators chose the moment deliberately. Maximum distraction, minimum scrutiny. Pass it fast before opposition could organize. Get it done while the getting was good. Wilson later expressed regret. He wrote that he had unwittingly ruined his country, that he had destroyed American independence through his actions. But by then, it was too late. The Federal Reserve existed. The genie was out of the bottle. Now let's talk about the occult elements. Because the timing of the Federal Reserve's creation reveals patterns that go beyond mere political convenience. December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. The winter solstice had just passed on December 21st. This is significant in occult tradition. The solstice represents death and rebirth, darkness giving way to light, destruction preceding creation. The Federal Reserve was born in this liminal time, the darkest days of the year, when the old year dies and the new year gestates. Occult practitioners consider this timing powerful for initiating major transformations. The number 13 appears repeatedly in Federal Reserve symbolism. 13 was the year it was created. 1913. 13 also happens to be significant in occult numerology. 12 plus 1. The disciples plus Christ. Or in darker interpretations, 12 plus the adversary. Look at American currency today. Count the occult symbols. The pyramid with the all-seeing eye, taken from Masonic tradition. The Latin phrases annuit coeptis and novus ordo seclorum. He approves our undertaking and new order of the ages. These aren't random decorations. The eye in the pyramid appears on the $1 bill. Above the pyramid float the words annuit coeptis, 13 letters. Below the pyramid, novus ordo seclorum, the new order, the new world order. And above the eye, the Latin phrase means he approves. Who is he? God or something else? In Masonic tradition, the all-seeing eye represents the great architect of the universe. But dig deeper into high-degree masonry, and you find that the great architect has another name, Lucifer, the light bearer. This isn't speculation. Albert Pike wrote about it explicitly in Morals and Dogma. Pike was Sovereign Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite's southern jurisdiction. He stated clearly that Lucifer is the god of the Masons, the light that illuminates their path. Many of the men who created the Federal Reserve were Masons. This is documented. J.P. Morgan belonged to the Lodge of Emulation in London. His son was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Mason. The Rockefellers had deep Masonic connections through various family members. Paul Warburg's brother, Max Warburg, stayed in Germany. Max financed both sides of World War I. He sat on the board of IG Farben, the chemical company that later produced Zyklon B for the Nazi concentration camps. The Warburg family moved in circles where occult practices were common. The Federal Reserve's structure itself reflects Masonic organizational principles. 12 regional banks surrounding a central authority. This mirrors the zodiac. 12 signs around a central sun. 12 disciples around Christ. 12 tribes around the tabernacle. But the real power doesn't rest in the 12 regional banks. It concentrates in one, the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Just as in occult tradition, the many serve the one. The periphery serves the center. The visible obscures the invisible. The New York Fed's building reveals its own symbolism. Located at 33 Liberty Street. 33. The highest degree in Scottish Rite Masonry. The number of illumination. The number of the master. The building's architecture incorporates Florentine Renaissance style, the same style favored by the Medici family, the banking dynasty that ruled Florence. The Medicis practiced occult arts. They patronized alchemists. They understood money as a form of magic, because that's what the Federal Reserve really does. Financial alchemy. Transforming nothing into something, creating money from thin air. This is the modern equivalent of the alchemist's dream of turning lead into gold. The mechanism works like this. The government needs money. The Treasury Department prints bonds. Fancy pieces of paper promising to repay money with interest. The Federal Reserve buys these bonds. But where does the Fed get the money to buy them? Nowhere. The money doesn't exist until the moment they buy the bond. A Federal Reserve accountant makes an entry in a ledger. Numbers appear on a screen. Money manifests from pure void. This is the mandrake mechanism, named after the mandrake root in Harry Potter that screams when pulled from the earth. The government now has money to spend, but this money is actually debt. Every dollar in circulation represents a dollar owed to the Federal Reserve plus interest. The debt can never be repaid because the money to pay the interest doesn't exist. To get money for interest payments, the government must issue more bonds. The Fed creates more money to buy them. The debt grows. The cycle perpetuates. This isn't a bug in the system. It's the core feature. Permanent debt equals permanent control. This is why the national debt only goes in one direction. Up. Always up. It's currently over $34 trillion. That's $34 million. Every man, woman, and child in America owes over $100,000 in federal debt. Debt they never agreed to. Debt created by a private banking cartel. The interest payments alone consume a massive portion of the federal budget. Hundreds of billions every year. Money that could fund infrastructure, education, healthcare. Instead, it flows to bondholders. And who are the major bondholders? The same banking families that created the system. This is the hidden tax called inflation. When the Fed creates money from nothing, it dilutes the value of existing money. Your savings lose purchasing power. Your wages buy less. Your standard of living declines. But the banks profit because they get the new money first before prices adjust. Economists call this the Cantillon effect. Those closest to money creation benefit most. Those furthest away suffer the losses. The Federal Reserve sits at the center of money creation. The banking elite get rich. The middle class gets hollowed out. The boom-bust cycle is built into this system. The Fed can expand the money supply, creating artificial prosperity. Asset prices inflate. People feel wealthy. They borrow and spend. The economy overheats. Then the Fed contracts the money supply. Credit tightens. Loans get called. Businesses fail. People lose jobs. Foreclosures spike. And who buys up the assets during the bust? The same banking interests that created the cycle. This happened in 1929. The Fed expanded credit through the 20s. The stock market soared. Then they contracted sharply. The market crashed. The Great Depression followed. J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers bought assets for pennies on the dollar. It happened in 2008. The Fed kept interest rates artificially low through the early 2000s. The housing bubble inflated. Then they raised rates. The bubble popped. Millions lost their homes. But BlackRock and other major financial firms bought up the foreclosed properties. Speaking of BlackRock, let's talk about the modern inheritors of Jekyll Island. Because the Federal Reserve System has spawned something even more powerful, a financial superstructure that owns everything. BlackRock was founded in 1988 by Larry Fink. It's the world's largest asset manager. It controls approximately $10 trillion in assets. That's $10,000 billion. More than the gross domestic product of every country, except America and China. Vanguard is the other giant. Founded in 1975, it manages over $8 trillion. Together, BlackRock and Vanguard own stakes in virtually every major corporation in America. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, ExxonMobil, J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America. Name a Fortune 500 company. They own pieces of it. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at who owns Vanguard. It's a private company. Ownership isn't publicly disclosed. But research suggests that the major shareholders are old banking families. Names like Rothschild appear. Names like Rockefeller surface. The same bloodlines, still in control. And who are BlackRock's biggest clients? Sovereign wealth funds, central banks. The Federal Reserve itself holds accounts with BlackRock. The European Central Bank works with BlackRock. It's a closed loop. The central banks create money. BlackRock and Vanguard invest it. They buy everything. They own everything. This is the completion of the Jekyll Island plan. Not just control of money creation, but ownership of all productive assets. The economy itself becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of the banking elite. Feudalism with a financial face. The interlocking directorate system that worried people in 1913 has metastasized into something far worse. The same people sit on multiple boards. They move between government and finance seamlessly. Treasury secretaries come from Goldman Sachs. They return to Goldman Sachs. Federal Reserve chairs move to BlackRock. Larry Fink himself is remarkably connected. He advises presidents. He speaks at Davos. He pushes environmental, social, and governance investing. ESG standards that BlackRock uses to control corporate behavior. Not through government regulation, but through financial pressure. When BlackRock tells a company to adopt certain policies or lose investment, companies comply. This is power that transcends democracy. Unelected, unaccountable, answerable only to shareholders who remain hidden behind layers of corporate structure. The Federal Reserve enables all of it. Every time there's a crisis, the Fed creates more money. Quantitative easing, pandemic relief, bank bailouts. The money flows to financial institutions. They buy more assets. Their power grows. Notice who doesn't get bailed out. Small businesses fail. Regular people lose jobs. But major financial institutions always survive. Too big to fail. Too connected to collapse. The system protects its own. This brings us to the philosophical conclusion. What does all this reveal about wealth and power in America? It reveals that extreme wealth isn't earned in the conventional sense. It's extracted through control of the money system. The richest individuals and families aren't the most productive. They're the most connected to the money spigot. It reveals that the American dream as sold to the public is largely mythology. Work hard, play by the rules, and you'll succeed. But the rules are rigged. The game is fixed. Those who control money creation can never lose. It reveals that democracy is subordinate to financial power. You can vote for any politician you want, but they all serve the same masters: the bankers who fund campaigns, the corporations that offer lucrative positions after public service, the system that enriches compliance and punishes resistance. Some call this capitalism, but it isn't. Capitalism requires competition, creative destruction, failure as well as success. The Federal Reserve System eliminates real competition. It protects established players. It socializes losses while privatizing gains. Others call it socialism, but it isn't that either. Socialism implies collective ownership and democratic control. The Fed is privately owned and democratically unaccountable. It serves elite interests, not collective welfare. Perhaps the best term is neo-feudalism, a modern version of the medieval system where lords owned the land and peasants worked it. Today, financial lords own the currency system. The middle class works to service debt. Same power dynamic, different mechanisms. The occult element can't be ignored either. Too many of the participants in this system belong to secret societies. Too much of the symbolism derives from mystery school traditions. Too many of the practices mirror ancient forms of control. Whether they literally believe in Lucifer or just use occult symbolism for its psychological impact, the effect is the same. They operate according to principles hidden from the masses. They communicate through symbols the profane don't understand. They coordinate through networks the public can't access. The skull and bones connection is significant. Both Bush presidents were members. Skull and Bones is known as the Brotherhood of Death. Its symbol is a skull over crossed bones, with the number 322 beneath. Chapter 322 of a German secret society. Many bonesmen have run the Federal Reserve or held treasury positions. This isn't coincidence. The same networks that created the Fed continue to staff it. Generation after generation, the bloodlines persist. The power perpetuates. The Bohemian Grove gatherings bring together Fed governors, Treasury officials, bank CEOs, and corporate titans. They meet every July in the California redwoods. They perform rituals before a 40-foot owl statue. They claim it's just fun. But the guest lists and the secrecy suggest otherwise. David Rockefeller admitted it openly. He wrote in his memoirs that he was proud to be part of a secret cabal working against American interests to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. His words, not mine. The Council on Foreign Relations that Rockefeller funded has published papers calling for the elimination of national sovereignty, for global governance structures, for a world central bank. The Federal Reserve was just the first step, the model to be replicated globally. And it has been. The European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the People's Bank of China. They all follow the same model. Central banks creating money from nothing, loading governments with debt, controlling economies through interest rate manipulation. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, coordinates between them. It's called the Central Bank of Central Banks. The same banking families have influence there too. Rothschild representatives, Rockefeller associates, Morgan descendants. The network spans the globe. This is the true legacy of Jekyll Island. Not just the Federal Reserve, but a template for global financial control. A system where democracy becomes theater and real power rests with those who control the money supply. So what can be done about it? That's the question everyone asks. The answer is uncomfortable. Very little can be done within the system. The system was designed to be self-perpetuating. Attempts at reform are absorbed and neutralized. Auditing the Fed gets discussed occasionally. Bills get introduced. They never pass, or they pass in watered-down form that reveals nothing. The Fed's true operations remain opaque. Its foreign transactions stay secret. Its gold holdings are unverified. Ending the Fed is even more difficult. Ron Paul called for it for decades. He educated millions about the Fed's nature. But abolition requires Congress to act. And Congress is captured. Campaign contributions flow from banking interests. Lucrative post-government positions await cooperative members. The best most people can do is understand the system, see it clearly, recognize how wealth extraction works, protect themselves as much as possible, buy hard assets, avoid debt, build community resilience. These are individual solutions to a systemic problem. But awareness itself has value. When enough people understand what happened on Jekyll Island, the mythology surrounding the Fed begins to crumble. The authority it claims becomes questionable. The legitimacy it assumes comes under scrutiny. The men who met on Jekyll Island in November 1910 succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They created the most powerful financial institution in human history. They designed a system that has transferred trillions of dollars from the productive economy to banking interests. They built it in secrecy. They sold it through deception. They protected it through complexity. And it endures because most Americans don't understand it. The conspiracy succeeded because nobody believed a conspiracy could be so vast. But the evidence is there, in memoirs and documents, in congressional records and historical accounts. Frank Vanderlip admitted the conspiratorial nature. B.C. Forbes reported on the secret meeting. The participants themselves eventually acknowledged what happened. The Federal Reserve is the triumph of organized money over democratic government. It's the institutionalization of wealth extraction. It's the mechanism by which the many serve the few. And it all began with 7 men on a private island, working in secret to design a system that would benefit themselves. The duck hunting trip that wasn't. The conspiracy hidden in plain sight. The coup executed with fountain pens instead of guns. This is the true story of Jekyll Island. Every dollar in your wallet carries the symbol, Federal Reserve Note. Not a dollar, a note, a promise to pay. But pay what? Pay to whom? The answer leads back to Jekyll Island, back to November 1910, back to 7 men who changed everything. They built an empire on debt. They constructed a cathedral to Mammon. They created the machinery of perpetual extraction. And they convinced the world it was for their own good. That's the genius of it. The greatest trick ever pulled. Enslavement disguised as protection. Theft masquerading as service. Control marketed as stability. The Federal Reserve is all of these things. 112 years after Jekyll Island, the system remains intact, stronger than ever, more entrenched, more powerful, more essential to the functioning of modern finance, which means more dangerous, more extractive, more corrosive to genuine prosperity. The question isn't whether the conspiracy happened. The evidence proves it did. The question is what it means for America today, for your economic future, for your children's opportunities, for the nation's independence. Because a country that doesn't control its own money supply isn't truly independent. It's a client state, a subsidiary, a possession, and Americans are starting to figure that out. The Jekyll Island Conspiracy succeeded, but conspiracies, once exposed, lose their power. The magic dissipates when the trick is revealed, and more people every day are seeing through the illusion. The Federal Reserve was born in darkness on a private island. Perhaps it will die in the light of public understanding, but only if enough Americans learn the truth. Only if the story of Jekyll Island spreads far enough, wide enough, deep enough. This is that story. The conspiracy that wasn't a theory. The plot that succeeded beyond imagination. The secret meeting that created the financial system we live under today. Jekyll Island, November 1910. 7 men, 1 plan, a century of consequences.